All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Wayne Austin. I'm a sales engineer at Sage Software, and this broadcast today is being brought to you by Fay Business Systems Group and Sage Software. Now, today's agenda, I'm going to be talking about why invest in a fixed assets management solution. I'm going to give you a complete overview fixed asset solutions. I'm also going to touch on the financial impact of ghost assets, which is one of the things, one of the issues that the solution is going to help you get resolved. Um, Also, given the COVID environment right now, there is a lot more organizations that may have decentralized teams or remote users. And I'm also going to touch on that, how you can use the solution to help keep track of who has what when it comes to remote assets. I'll give you some details about how the solution will integrate with Sage 100 as far as creating assets or posting journal entry back to the Sage 100 side. Also, some changes on the CARES Act did have an impact on fixed assets. So I'll go into some details about that and share with you how you can get more information. Then I'm going to spend some time in the solution showing you how the solution works and how you can actually utilize this pretty intuitive and easy to use solution to manage your fixed assets. So first, let's start off by identifying what are some of the values with using the Sage fixed asset solutions. The solution is going to help you maintain compliance with IRS tax laws and GAAP rules. It does a two-way integration with the Sage 100 solution, so certainly that is going to create some efficiencies by reducing duplicate data entry. It's going to ensure that you have clean and accurate data going in, so therefore on the reporting side coming out, you're going to have pretty accurate and concise data to work with. It's also going to help you eliminate overpayment of taxes and insurance premiums, for example. And as we all know, time is not free, so anything that saves you time will certainly save you money. So there will definitely be some efficiencies you'll gain out of using the solutions. Because the solution actually has the ability for you to attach images, invoices, and so on, this is also something you can include in your disaster recovery plan. So if one of your sites, for example, gets damaged or destroyed, you can easily search for all of the assets at that locations. And if you've got images or invoices attached, easily prove what you had there. This really creates easy communication with external accounting firms, for example, because you'll be able to generate some pretty accurate reports and quite a bit of information that you can then present to your outside CPA firms if you're using an outside CPA firm. It does also include Sarbanes-Oxley compliant reports. So if for auditing purposes, you need to identify who has made what type of change in the solution, to what assets or financial changes to asset properties, all of those things can be captured in those Sarbanes-Oxley compliant reports. So let's take a moment to look at the overall life cycle of a fixed asset just in general. Certainly you'll go through an acquisition phase where you're going to purchase that asset either from an AP or PO transactions, and you may be placing it directly in service where it's going to start depreciation. Now, in some instances, you may be purchasing multiple pieces of equipment, for example, that's going to require some type of project phase or construction in progress phase before it is placed in the service, and then it's placed in the service to start depreciating. Certainly, as you go through this depreciation for tax or for GAAP, you'll be able to generate reports, whatever is needed during that phase of the asset life cycle. In the physical inventory portion, this is where you would, at some point, go out and verify that you actually have what you have to ensure that you don't have assets that are missing. And of course, you'll need to be able to report on this as well. So reporting, as you can see, is going to come into play in many places here, because during the acquisition phase, you need to be able to report on all of those roll-up costs. During the depreciation, all of those activities up through and including disposal of that asset. And of course, on the disposal side, end of life, you need to be able to get all of your gain loss information and so on, including information needed for calculating your 4797, or your federal gain losses. So the Sage Fixed Asset Solutions has components that handles each of these phases of a fixed asset's life cycle. So let's start off with looking at planning. The planning module will handle the portion of the asset life cycle from acquisition, where it's going to go through some type of project phase or construction in progress, where you need to be able to manage a budget for that portion of the life cycle, where you're going to be acquiring additional cost, all of the roll-up costs that may tie to that, and then once that project is complete, be able to place those assets in service. The planning module allows you to report on your spend against budget. It'll even let you report against two sets of numbers. So you can look at your actual spend, for example, against both an original and a revised budget. Now, once any of those individual line items that are in fact going to become a fixed asset, spending is complete on that item, you can actually send them directly to the depreciation module to be placed in service. So the integration between these two pieces works quite well, and it eliminates any type of duplicate data entry there. Let's take a look at the depreciation module. So this is the heart of the solution. This is where you're going to be doing your calculations for tax, for GAAP, state, AMT, and so on, and be able to report on your depreciation for each period during that fixed assets life cycle. This solution also includes more than 50 depreciation methods, everything from ADS to straight line, makers, supports 168 allowance, as well as Section 179. You can have both tangible and intangible assets included and have all of the depreciation methods needed to handle this phase. Certainly, once an asset reaches its end of life, you're going to be able to do disposal of that report, of that asset, generate reports showing your gain loss calculation information. The solution also includes an actual fileable 4562 that you can generate in addition to the attachment, detail attachment that would go along with that. It also has a standard 4797 sale of property report, property tax reports, depreciation expense reports, and of course journal entry reports, which Sage 100 will actually pull that information from the depreciation module. I will go into that in a bit more detail later. The tracking module. This is the module that would be used for doing physical inventories of your fixed assets. So if, for example, you're using barcodes where you're assigning asset ID tags to your assets, you can use either a traditional scanner or you can use an Android app where you can then go out and perform those full physical inventories to identify anything that be missing, that could be missing, and be able to report on the results of that inventory. Now, users that are using the tracking module have no access to the depreciation fields. So that's actually a good thing. You can feel confident that you can assign those tasks to a different group, and accounting has no worry that the person doing a physical inventory can accidentally change something like your depreciation method or estimated life in an asset detail. Now, in addition to the many standard reports included in the solution, the custom reporting options will include a fully integrated version of SAP Crystal reports. That gives you the ability to create any type of ad hoc report you may need from scratch. It'll give you access to any field in the database and any company in the same database. You can also export a standard report to Crystal and further customize it here as well. Let's talk a bit about ghost assets. So what are ghost assets? So these are assets that are on your books and your registry, but however, they can't be accounted for. They're either missing, lost, or stolen, or they may have been taken out of service and that information not communicated to the accounting staff. So what are some of the impacts ghost assets can have? These can certainly impact taxes, insurance premiums, It certainly can also impact productivity, and especially if these are business critical assets. It could also impact your budget processes because you're not going to be budgeting for replacing these assets that you believe are actually in service when they're not. The opposite is also true as far as zombie assets, so assets that are out there in your environment in service, but you have no record of them, because those you're not going to be accounting for them in your insurance coverage, for example, and you certainly wouldn't have been paying taxes for them, which creates a liability for you as well. And if they're IT assets and you don't have the accurate license count, things like that, those are also other implications you can have. So both sides of this is important that you know that you do have out there in service what you're supposed to have and what you do have in your registry. And also if something new is placed in your environment, you have a record of that as well. So it's very important to keep track of both sides of that. So how our solution actually helps you handle and mitigate any issues surrounding ghost or zombie assets. It gives you the ability to do a full physical inventory where you can, for example, use barcode labels that correspond to an asset ID number, which information is populated in the general information fields in both the depreciation and the tracking module. This gives you the ability to now go out, scan those barcodes, update any information that's changed, and be able to capture all of the details of the assets that you should have. You can accomplish this using either a traditional scanner or an Android app. And just so you're aware, the users that are actually using the tracking software are the ones that would need a license. And the users that are simply using an Android app or a scanner out doing that physical inventory, they do not need a license. We currently have support for the standard scanners, which come pre-configured to actually work with our solution, or you can use an Android app. We do not have Apple iOS support yet. That is still in development. Once that physical inventory is complete, this is what's going to be important to the folks in the accounting department. The person conducting that physical inventory, or actually using the tracking module software, will be able to generate this reconciliation report. And as you can see, the top column there, it's identifying assets not found with a status code of N. These are your ghost assets. So you have them on the registry. They can't be found while doing an inventory. So they're missing, lost, or stolen, whatever the case may be. But this gives you a way of identifying what they are, asset tag number, what it is, and then the accounting staff can then do a proper disposal of these assets and get them off the books. So this is how you would mitigate those liabilities associated with ghost assets. Now let's talk a bit about keeping track of remote employees or remote assets. This screenshot is from the general information fields in the depreciation module. Now, if you notice in the top left portion, you've got a series of fields, information fields that are capturing things like your asset ID number, where it is, what department, asset class, and so on. And if you notice, I also have a field where I'm keeping track of who the asset is assigned to. So you'll see here in this particular asset detail, I have assets that are assigned to Jennifer Clark. All of the fields on the top portion, these general information fields, are actually shared between both the depreciation module and the tracking module. It's using the same database. Now in the tracking module, there would be no book fields down below. So if you take a look at this screenshot, we're now looking at the same general information fields, but this is in the tracking module. So as you can see, there's no access to the book fields down below, but I can still certainly see what the asset is, where it is, its asset class, serial number, and who the asset's assigned to. And again, we're looking at an asset assigned to Jennifer Clark. So if in your current environment, you do have users who are using IT assets or any type of assets, and you want to keep track of who has what, you can use one of these general information fields to identify that. So if, for example, you wanted to search for all of the assets assigned to a particular person, you can easily do that and generate a report such as this that's going to show all of the assets that are tied to that person. So if, for example, that person is leaving the organization, you can quickly generate a report like this and send that off to HR to identify that, hey, Jennifer Clark has these devices, make sure you get them back when they're leaving. Another use of these general information fields, for example, could be a situation if you have assets that are moving from site to site, job site to job site, and you want to be able to search and identify assets going to a particular site, you can search based on any of these fields. So that would be another use of that type of field. Now, let's switch gears and talk a bit about Sage 100 integration. This is a screenshot of the visual workflow if you have that configured inside of Sage 100. For the integration to work between the Sage 100 and Sage Fixed Asset solution, actually all of the integration is done in the Sage 100 side. The only thing you need to do on the Sage Fixed Asset side and ensure all of your GL account numbers for that company actually matches the GL account numbers that are in Sage 100. Now, you can actually create assets in Sage 100 while doing an accounts payable or PO transaction. If you look at the graphic on the right here, towards the bottom, you'll see there's actually a field labeled asset template. So while going through this accounts payable transaction, for example, I can select that I want to create an asset in the Sage Fixed Asset Depreciation module, and I can actually assign a template. The benefit of using the template is that in addition to getting the information from the Sage 100 AP or PO transaction, by assigning a template, I can include in my template the correct asset class, the correct property type, depreciation methods, or estimated life for that type of asset. So when I create an asset while doing this transaction inside of Sage 100, it's going to place the asset in service in the depreciation module with everything needed to start depreciation. So again, that's another efficiency, saves duplicate data entry. Now, with regards to journal entry, once you've run depreciation in the Sage Fixed Assets Depreciation module, all of that information in the General Ledger Posting Report is available to Sage 100. So you would simply start the process in Sage 100 of closing out, doing your month-end processing, for example, where it will actually pull that GL info from the depreciation module and easily gives you the ability to now close out your month, for example. These are some screen captures of some of the reports as you go through the phases of doing that, with some of the information that it actually captures. Okay, let's talk a bit about some of the changes in the CARES Act and how that impacts qualified improvement property. So for qualified improvement property, in the past, you would be taking depreciation at 39 years for GDS and 40 years ADS life. They were Section 179 eligible, and they were not bonus eligible. Now, under the CARES Act changes, those same qualified improvement property can now be depreciated at 15 years for GDS and for 20 years for ADS, and they are still Section 179 eligible, and now they're also bonus eligible. If you're doing this for non-bonus, you can certainly do this as straight line half year, or you can take bonus at 100% at straight line half year as well. So it is bonus eligible. Now, if you do go out on Sage City, for example, right now to get information with your current product, such as Sage 100, there is a fixed asset presence out there on Sage City. You can actually search for CARES Act changes info, and one of my colleagues who's also a CPA has written a couple of great articles here that you can easily search for some more information about CARES Act and how they impact qualified improvement property. Now let's take a moment and look at the solution so you can see how this actually works. So I'm in the Sage Fixed Assets Depreciation module. And let's go into an asset detail. So these are the fields that I mentioned that you can customize, capture information such as who assets are assigned to. You can search based on any of these fields, and of course you can report on any of these fields. Now, we do update our tax rules on an annual basis. We usually do our tax updates in January. Currently, there are 7 books in the solution. We will be increasing that in an upcoming release that's going to be coming out in October, where we're going to increase the total number of books possible up to 20. You can rename the state, AMT, or the custom books currently, as well as the additional books when those are added. The solution does support short years, and if you have a need for alternate reporting periods, such as a 445 or a 13 period, we have another version. This is the standard version. The premier version actually handles alternate reporting periods. Now, I mentioned templates and how that would interact with Sage 100. To just give you a quick example of the use of templates here, and how you would create them. So if you go to add an asset, this would be blank. And of course, I can populate information by simply pointing and clicking if I've customized these fields that I'm now including, for example, my list of asset classes, my GL account, and so on. So to create a template, I can simply choose what information do I want included in a template. For example, for computer equipment, I can select the asset class, I can select for example, the correct GL account info, and I can even populate property type, and this would be the IRS property type, depreciation methods, and estimated lives for all the books, and simply save as template and give it a name, and that will now show up in my template list, which I can actually utilize by simply going here and choosing a template, and it's going to populate any of the information I included in my template. So in this particular computer template, I'm including a basic description, the appropriate GL asset account, accumulated account, and GL expense account, as well as asset class and even department and location. But more importantly, I'm including the property type, depreciation method, and estimated life for all of my active books. So this is the information that would be available in Sage 100. So if I'm telling Sage 100 to create an asset from an accounts payable transaction and to apply a template, it is going to get that acquisition date and in-service date from Sage 100 as well as the value for all the books. But however, it's now going to merge it with the data in the template and populate my depreciation method and estimated life as well as property type for all the books. Therefore, I would not need to do any additional actions here. So when I do place an asset in service from Sage 100, it'll show up with everything needed to start depreciation. Okay. Now, I mentioned that there was some really good reporting included in this, including some reports that you can run for tax, and certainly for posting your journal entry. Now, once you've run depreciation here, which I can simply do here, I'm going to run it for all of my books, and let's go ahead and run depreciation for August. Now my assets are depreciated. You'll see my prior depreciation through date of July, current depreciation through date is August. Once I've run depreciation, I do not have to run this general ledger posting report and export it for import into Sage 100. as soon as I run depreciation here in the depreciation module, all of this information is available to Sage 100, and Sage 100 will actually pull the information from this report and for you to do your month-end processing. So you don't have to do a manual export or import. And there's actually a link section here. So if I actually try to run that posting from a link, it'll simply tell me that Sage 100 will pull the data. You don't send it out. So the integration works quite well. Now, if you've created assets from Sage 100, there's actually an additions report in addition to the report that would be generated in Sage 100 for what assets were created. You can certainly come in here and run something like the annual activity report if you want to see what assets have been added. Now, I can run this for all assets, have it summarize the ones with no activity, for example, and it'll show me everything that's been added year to date along with the value. Now I can isolate a particular date range and create a group based on that. So if you take a look at this, it's going to break it down by account. And anything with a value here was added current year to date. And on the last page, you will see your totals. It'll also capture transfer ins, transfers out, as well as disposal and your ending cost data. But I could certainly also create a group looking at a particular date range, and I could run it based on that. So if I wanted to create a group looking at assets added within a particular date range, I can actually do that from my group editor here. So let's say I'm going to create a group looking at assets, and I can create groups based on any information I want. So think of groups really as filters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it I just want to look at assets with a placed in service date in a particular date range. Placed in service date, I can choose which book I want it to look at. In my case, they're going to all be all the same, and I'm going to tell it a date range. So here I'm going to just specifically say I want to look at assets placed in service between January and December of 2020. So now I'm just explicitly saying anything that I've added in the system and has a place in service date within that date range, I can do that. I can create groups based on any information I choose, date range, location, and so on. And that's something you may certainly want to do. For example, for property taxes, you may create a location-based filter if you're operating in multiple tax jurisdictions to isolate assets that are at a particular site or particular jurisdiction and report on that separately. So let's take a look at how that works. So now if I go back to my report section to that same report, it will still capture the information I looked at before, but now I've isolated a subset of assets, and I could certainly run this report just on that subset of assets placed in service within a particular date range. I can also run my property tax report on assets based on location if I've created a group for that. So now I'm just looking at assets within that date range on that report. And how that works with your property tax report. If you created subsets based on where the assets are physically located, I can run it on just that subset of assets. If you're using a field to identify property tax category, for example, you can summarize assets, older than 3 years, 5 years if you need to. But this will now break down my property tax report on just that subset of assets broken down by property tax category and acquisition year end. So let's make this bigger here. And you can see here broken down by property tax category and acquisition year end. Some of the other tax-related reports you'll probably be interested in. Let's go ahead and run the actual 4562. So let's say you're sitting at year end. And as I mentioned, we do our tax updates usually in January. And one of the things that will get updated is this 4562 will get updated to the correct tax year 4562. You'll have both pages. And all the reports here are fully exportable. So you'll have the actual 4562 as well as the detail attachment, which can all be exported, of course. In addition, there's a tax expense report for those of you that are doing the 168 or Section 179 that you can use to reconcile that 4562. For sale of property and your federal ordinary gain losses, you can run this 4797 worksheet, and this will generate everything you would need for that sale of property report. And as you can see, it will break everything down into your correct section property, your 1245, 1250, 1254, 1255, and your federal ordinary gain losses will be on the second page. And again, these reports are all exportable. All the reports in the solution can be exported to Crystal Reports, PDF, CSV file, Excel, or Excel data only, even out to our Word document. So you have many export options. Now, there are also some projection reports included. So if you need to look at future year depreciation, there's a monthly projection that you can run for any fiscal year. So let's say I wanted to run this for 2021. And this will look at each period during the fiscal and break it down by monthly period expense and year to date, so you can easily see what your depreciation will be looking out into the future. This one will actually break it down by each period during a fiscal, and you can actually drill down and look at the individual details for any period during that fiscal. And you can run this for any of the books. You can also sort and subtotal that in any way you want to. If you need to sort it by location, asset class, and so on, you'd be able to do that. There's also an annual projection, which gives you the ability to look at multiple years at once. You can actually look up to 99 years at a time. Now, this one will actually do a side-by-side of multiple books. You can use start off in current fiscal or previous fiscal or future fiscal, and you can also sort and subtotal this in any way you choose. This one will simply give you the full year depreciation for each year for whatever number of years you choose. So if you're involved in the budget and planning side of things, these two projection reports would actually be important to you, so you can see your future year depreciation. And of course, there's other standard reports like your depreciation expense. This one will capture your prior depreciation through date, current through date. So if you're on a monthly basis, you'd be looking at 1 month at a time, or if you're on a quarterly, or if you want to look at an annual basis. You can also even look back at prior years if you want to go back in the past and, for example, look at Q4 of your last fiscal or your entire last fiscal. It will show your prior depreciation through date, current through date, and your depreciation list run info. It will give your totals on the last page. Okay. And another report which will certainly be important is going to be that disposal report. So let's take a look at that. And as I mentioned, this is going to capture all of your ordinary gain losses. I can look at a month, a quarter, a year, any time period I want, and it's simply going to capture any disposal, be it full or partial, during the date range that I selected. The solution does have the ability to do full or partial disposals. So let's look at what gets captured. It is going to capture the system number, which is automatically assigned by the software, the asset ID number, which is the field that you actually have control of. So just to point out those differences, the system number here, this column, is going to be automatically assigned by the software. Every asset you add is going to get the next available system number. Asset ID field, this is user defined. So this would be if you are using, for example, a barcoding system, that barcode corresponds to that asset ID number. That's the number that you would be populating here in that asset ID field. It will take up to 50 characters, anything alphanumeric. It's that information. So it's also going to give you a description of what it is, the in-service date, your disposal date. Under acquired value, if you've done a full disposal, it's going to be the full acquisition value of that asset. If you've done a partial disposal, it's going to be the disposal amount that you disposed of, the portion you disposed of. So if you take a look at my system number 381 here, you'll see there's 2 entries for that line item, and that's because I disposed of $9,000 on one occasion and a $4,500 portion on another occasion. It is going to capture the accumulated depreciation as well as your net proceeds, give you a total for that, and your realized gain loss from the transaction is calculated. It's also going to capture anything that you recognize or deferred, and this report can be sorted in any way you choose. Now, let's take a look at the mechanics of actually doing that disposals here. So if you're going to dispose of a single asset, I can simply dispose of an asset here. And I can do sale, abandonment, taxable exchange, like-kind exchange, whatever type of disposal I want. If I'm doing it by sale, I can simply populate my cash, non-cash, or expense of sale info. If I'm doing a partial disposal, I can say yes here and enter the value of the portion that I'm disposing. So let's say I'm going to dispose of this asset by sale and a full disposal. I'll throw in some cash and some expense of sale here. Calculate my gain loss. I can actually even preview the disposal worksheet before committing to it. And I do want to point out for those of you that are doing 168 allowance or section 179, this is going to get factored in your disposal calculation, as you can see here, for bonus depreciation or section 179, even if you took an investment tax credit. So you do have this level of detail you can show an auditor if that becomes necessary. I can go ahead and say OK, complete my disposal, and that's where the transactions tab comes in, that you can see I've captured the fact that I've done a full disposal by sale, my cash, non-cash expense of sale info. I can pull up the actual transaction or worksheet, export it or print it, anything I need. Since I've done a full disposal here, the book fields are all grayed out because this asset's now disposed. And the history tab is going to capture all of the asset history from creation through disposal. And it will show the date done in the system separate from the actual disposal date, as well as who did it. This will also capture your cash, non-cash expense of sale info from the transaction. And if, for example, you made a mistake, you need to undo this transaction, you can simply go back to the Transactions tab, delete last transaction, and it's like it never happened. Everything goes back to the way it was. And the History tab still retains the information from the disposal, just creates a new entry that the last transaction was deleted, when it was done, and who did it. Now, there are also some other pretty helpful tools included and resources. As I mentioned, one of the things you can do is actually attach images, right? You can actually attach images, invoices, you name it. Basically, if you can scan it, take a picture of it, you can attach it. PDFs, JPEGs, bitmap, and so on. If you ordered multiple pieces of equipment on a single invoice, you can easily link that single invoice to multiple assets at once. So in my case, I simply have an invoice and an image of the asset attached. To see what tax rule changes are included in the current release, you can go to Help, What's New, click on Learn More, and it's going to show you the details of any tax rule changes as well as feature changes, and for example, changes to Section 179 limits. So you have a quick reference built in here that you can easily see what tax rule changes are included. For those of you doing bonus depreciation, you do have a means of changing en masse your 168 allowance percentage. You can actually turn bonus off or on for any subset of assets for any fiscal. Since it's rule-based, it will only make change assets that do qualify under IRS rules. You don't have to be concerned that it's going to change an asset to 100% bonus that does not qualify for 100% bonus, for example. If you have to be concerned about a mid-quarter, you do have the means of changing from half-year to mid-quarter convention as a global change. If, for example, you exceed 40% of your assets being placed in service in Q4, where under IRS rules, you need to make that change, you can do that as a global change quite easily in the solution. You also have a means of making changes. So in the case of, for example, the CARES Act, where you could make changes to those qualified improvement property that can now be depreciated at 15 years. So in my sample data here, I actually created a group already, identifying my qualified improvement property, and I can easily now make that change where I can change either the depreciation method from what they currently are to straight line half year, which is what's required under the IRS rules. And I can also, at the same time, change those 39-year estimated life to 15-year. So I can make all of those changes in one shot. And I do have the option of making the change effective from my current depreciation through date, or I can go back to the placed in service date. So it gives you quite a bit of flexibility. Now, the solution also does include an audit advisor for those of you who are doing depreciation for tax. So you can run this for your tax book. Let's take a look at a prior fiscal year where I know I do have some issues in here I wanted to find. And what this is going to do is look at everything you're doing in the company and identify anything that is a potential red flag for you to get audited. So you see here it's identifying an issue related to makers. Here is identifying an issue related to Section 179. Let's take a look at this one. So you'll see here it's going to show an exception found in red. It's going to identify the issue. In this case, it's telling me the limit for that fiscal was $1,179,000 expense. It's going to identify a resolution, and it's telling me here to correct this issue, I need to reduce my total 179 claim by 5.675 million. So I'm way over the limit. It is also going to create a group where any asset that's triggering the exception will show up in that group. So now to make this correction, I can simply go back to my list view, and you can see here, these are the auto-created groups for those issues that it identified. Let's take a look at the one that's 179 related. And you can see here that in this particular asset, I'm taking a 675,000 deduction, and the rest of them, I'm taking 700K. So individually, I'm below that million limit, but combined, I'm well over the limit. So I can reduce my 179 amounts, and now I can simply delete those auto-created groups, rerun that audit advisor to make sure everything is clean, and I'm good to go. So it's a very handy little tool. Now, for a quick peek at the other modules that I spoke about, the tracking module, just want you to see the look and feel is the same. It's actually using the same database as the depreciation module. And this is where you can actually do your physical inventories without the ability to do anything to impact depreciation. As you can see, it has all of the general information fields, no book fields. You're able to push out an inventory list out to any of those devices that I mentioned earlier, an Android app or a regular scanner. And once completion of that inventory is achieved, you can now generate that reconciliation report that is going to show if you do in fact have some ghost assets out there. These are the assets that were not found during my last inventory, status of N. So these would be my ghost asset. It'll show a tag number, what they are, so they can simply pass this information on to the folks in the accounting side, where you can then do a proper disposal of these assets, because the people, the users that are using the tracking module do not have the ability to do disposals or those type of transactions or do anything to impact depreciation. And with regards to the planning module for handling CIP, for those of you that do have that, this is a module that gives you the ability to handle all of the roll-up costs associated with your projects, and you can place those items directly in service in the depreciation module. It does give you ability to look at your actual spend against both an original and a revised budget. So when you set up your project, for example, you can start with your original budget, and you can certainly later come back and create a revised budget. You're able to track all of the realized cost for the actual line item itself that's going to become the fixed assets, as well as all of your roll-up costs coming from various transactions, from accounts payable or purchase orders for materials, labor, and so on. And you can quite easily create assets from here. Any assets that I've already told that spending is complete, I can now see here are eligible to be placed in service. It's going to show you how many assets will be created from each individual line item. You do have the ability to split a single line item into multiple assets. So in this case, my building sign here, for example, is going to create 4 assets. The rest of these are going to be a single asset. If you are telling it to use a template, you would see that here. And I can simply hit create assets and create whichever of these I selected. So for example, I can select these 2 and place them in company and place them in service in one company. I can select the others and place them in service in a different company. And of course, I can easily report on all of this, including reports looking at multiple projects at once, where I can easily see what my spend is against either an original or a revised budget. So this would give me a quick way of looking at multiple projects and see at the high level what my spend is, my actual budget, my actual spend, and whether I'm over or under budget. I can run this expanded out so I can see the individual details of line items, where you can see here this one is 69 grand over budget, this line item is 7848 over budget, that one's 45K over, but I'm under budget overall for the project. And when I do place assets in service in the depreciation module that are sent from the planning module coming from CIP, they're actually quite easy to find in the depreciation module. It will actually create a group labeled planning with a date and timestamp. If I send 1 item or 100 items, they'll all show up here at that date and time, and you can look at the details. This particular item, I used a template, so in addition to providing any information to general information fields that I pushed over from the project, it is also getting the actual acquisition date, place in service date, and value from the planning module. But however, in my template, I included the property type for this type of asset, personal property, my depreciation method, I'm doing MA200 bonus, estimated life for all the books. And so this item was placed in service at everything it needed to start depreciation, but no further action needed. So it is actually a pretty comprehensive solution that will enable you to manage your fixed assets through their complete life cycle. All right, so now I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Looks like we have no questions in the chat. So if you do, if you would like some more information or would like to see a personal product demonstration of the fixed asset solution, please feel free to reach out to your account manager at Fay Business Systems Group, or you can email Jesse Heller directly, the marketing director at Fay, by the email address listed here.